A turning point in ancient history, the Battle of Gaugamela, taking place on the 1st of October 331 BC, perhaps the most critical confrontation of Alexander the Great's military career. The Persian Empire, ruled by King Darius III, was Alexander's final opponent in this conflict. Darius chose the battlefield of Gaugamela, close to modern-day Mosul in Iraq, so that he could take advantage of his numerical superiority and the strength of his chariots. Even though the Macedonian force was fewer than the Persians, Alexander used inventive tactics to overcome the numerical disadvantage. He adopted a rejected flank tactic, which drew Persian infantry out of formation and let his cavalry take advantage. As a result of the nimble movements of Alexander, he was able to launch a decisive charge at Darius and achieve victory. And, as of the Battle of Gaugamela's conclusion, the path was cleared for his unimpeded push into Central Asia and India. Hello everyone, and welcome to the new viewers. Welcome back to the regular viewers. If you'd like to support the channel, a like and subscribe is right there. Otherwise, just enjoy the content. If you want to go above and beyond, there's a few links in the description. But for now, let's all get nice and relaxed. Today's a special one, all about the Battle of Gaugamela, taking you back more than 2,000 years ago. Following Alexander the Great's victory over King Darius III at the Battle of Issus in November 333 BC, the wife of Darius, along with his mother and daughters Stateria II and Dripetus, were taken captive by the Macedonians. Additionally, Alexander gained complete control over southern Asia Minor, which is present-day Turkey. Now, as a consequence of his defeat, King Darius retreated back to Babylon, where he aimed to regroup his remaining forces from a previous battle. After a prolonged conflict that started in January and lasted until July 332 BC, Alexander had successfully taken control of the Levant. The siege of Gaza marked Alexander's second significant military encounter, and due to the high casualties and redeployment of Persian troops to assist in the Battle of Issus, the number of Persian forces in Egypt was very much diminished. As a result, when Alexander arrived in Egypt, the Persian satrap named Mazakes surrendered without much notable resistance. In terms of Darius, well, he attempted to discourage Alexander from launching additional military offenses against his dominion through diplomatic means. One modern historian, Nawotka, asserts that due to the contradictory accounts from the ancient authors, it's somewhat speculative to rebuild the peace discussions. Now, ancient historians, on the other hand, offer varying descriptions of his interactions with Alexander, which can be categorized into 3 distinct instances of bargaining. According to reports, Darius first sought peace and the safe return of his family, who, by the way, were being treated with kindness by the Macedonians. He first proposed paying a ransom of 10,000 talents, then suggested giving up property in Asia Minor, west of the Halys River. But eventually, he even offered to acknowledge Alexander as an equal monarch, which is ironic because Darius's title, or one of, in the traditional fashion of those kings, is actually the King of Kings, extending an olive branch of equality in royal status. Well, that seems to be quite an act of desperation. Unfortunately for Darius, Alexander declined every single one of these offers. Now, the 1st and 2nd century historians, Justin, Arrian, and Curtius Rufus, have their own accounts of the battles of the time. Now, according to them, Darius had dispatched a letter to Alexander following the Battle of Issus. The message explicitly instructed Alexander to retreat from Asia and liberate all of his captives. Curtius and Justin report that Darius proposed a payment in exchange for his captives, whereas Arrian does not make any reference to such a payment. Curtius characterizes the tone of the letter as reportedly quite offensive, almost threatening. And of course, Alexander did not appreciate that kind of attitude. A subsequent negotiation endeavor occurred following the seizure of Tyre. Darius proposed a matrimonial alliance between Alexander and his daughter Statera II, along with the concession of all land located to the west of the Halys River. Justin is more general and does not specify a particular daughter. He merely refers to a part of Darius's realm. Diodorus Siculus, you may have heard of him, a Greek historian from the 1st century, also recounts the proposal of granting all land located to the west of the Halys River, along with a covenant of friendship and a substantial ransom for Darius's prisoners. Diodorus is the sole ancient historian who records the occurrence of Alexander's concealment of this letter, and his subsequent presentation of a counterfeit one that served his own personal goals. Well, as Diodorus is the only one who cites this, it must be taken with a little bit of a grain of salt. Following this unsuccessful second diplomatic attempt, King Darius commenced preparations for another confrontation with Alexander. However, despite previous attempts, Darius made one more endeavor to engage in negotiations with the Macedonians, following Alexander's departure from Egypt. The third offer made by Darius was even more generous. He commended Alexander for his treatment of his mother, Sisygambus, and granted him several rewards, that being all land located to the west of the Euphrates, a shared control over the Achaemenid Empire, the marriage to one of his daughters, and a substantial amount of 30,000 talents of cash. According to Diodorus, Alexander openly discussed this proposal with his companions, and one can't blame him. It's a pretty good deal. Well, Parmenion was the sole individual who voiced his opinion, stating, "If I were Alexander, I would willingly accept the proposed terms and establish a formal agreement." Well, according to the ancient sources, Alexander said back to him, "I would do the same if I were Parmenion." Alexander ultimately declined Darius's invitation and firmly asserted that there could be only a single ruler of Asia. He summoned Darius to either submit to him or get ready to fight, with the purpose of determining the ultimate ruler of all Asia. The accounts provided by other historians regarding the third negotiation have resemblance to Diodorus's narrative, but with variations in specific aspects. Diodorus, Curtius, and Arrian assert that an embassy was dispatched in lieu of a written correspondence, a claim which, by the way, is also made by Justin and Plutarch, who lived in the 1st century. Plutarch and Arrian state that the amount of ransom provided for the prisoners was 10,000 talents, whereas Diodorus, Curtius, and Justin all report a value of 30,000. According to Arrian, Darius made his third attempt during the siege of Tyre. However, other historians believe that the second negotiating attempt occurred during that period. Despite his previous unsuccessful negotiation attempts, Darius had made the decision to now prepare for another confrontation with Alexander. Thus, Alexander traveled from Egypt to the Tigris River, passing through Syria in the northeast during the late spring or early summer of 331 BC. He arrived at Thapsacus on the Euphrates River in July or August. Mazaeus, under the orders of Darius, was supposed to lead 3,000 cavalrymen to protect the Euphrates crossing near Thapsacus, but he managed to escape as Alexander's army approached. According to Arrian, Alexander reached the Tigris by the end of September. In the summer of 331 BC, Alexander traversed the Euphrates River. Instead of taking a direct southeast route to Babylon, he opted for a northern path. This decision allowed him to have a clear view of the Armenian mountains and the Euphrates River on his left side. Additionally, this route provided easier access to supplies and spared his soldiers from enduring the intense heat of the more direct road. The Macedonians received information from the captured Persian scouts that Darius had established a camp beyond the Tigris River. So, despite the challenges, Alexander successfully crossed over the river, as it was not defended, on his way for the confrontation. However, back to Diodorus Siculus for a moment, who shows that Alexander's expedition to Mazaeus was the sole mission undertaken to cross the Tigris, in fact due to his perception of the river's depth and the strength of its stream. He decided against defending it. Mazaeus employed scorched earth tactics in the region that Alexander's army had to cross, as reported by Diodorus and Curtius Rufus. On the 20th to the 21st of September 331 BC, a nearly complete lunar eclipse occurred after the Macedonian army crossed the Tigris River. Shortly after, Alexander's army captured 2 or 3 cavalrymen from the forces of Mazaeus. These captives provided valuable information about the location of Darius's army. They told him that they were all about 8 miles away, at a place called Gaugamela. Based on this intelligence, Alexander deduced that Darius would not respond to the ground-flattening activities at Gaugamela. So, he allowed his soldiers 4 days to rest and recover before engaging in battle with Darius's army. The Persians were expected to disrupt Alexander's army and sever its long supply routes as it advanced into Mesopotamia. However, for them, they were unsuccessful in accomplishing either of these objectives, The Persians were reportedly surprised by Alexander's choice to take the northern route, completely unexpected. Well, just like Cyrus the Younger, who chose to take the direct southern route to Babylon, Darius would have anticipated Alexander to follow the same way. However, Cyrus was ultimately defeated at the Battle of Cunaxa in 401, so perhaps taking the southern route's not the best idea. Now, Darius's use of scythed chariots and the second scorched earth strategy indicates his intention to replicate that battle. Despite the failure of the scorched earth campaign, Alexander's army would still lacked sufficient provisions to maintain itself if it had taken the southern route. At the plain of Cunaxa, Darius planned to decisively defeat a malnourished and overburdened Macedonian army, but lo and behold, they took the northern route instead. So it looks like they burned all of the farms for nothing. Well, after Alexander left for the northern road, Mazaeus undoubtedly returned to Babylon to convey the news. Darius most likely made the decision to prohibit Alexander from crossing the Tigris. It is probable that Alexander crossed the river around Thapsacus instead of Babylon, causing the strategy to fail. Darius intentionally led the Macedonians to Gaugamela, according to one historian, Jonah Lendering, which was the Persians' preferred location for war. In contrast, it suggested that Alexander had to make spontaneous decisions, and really didn't have much of a choice but to choose Gaugamela as the ideal place to fight. Not the best place, but the best among the worst. Now, in terms of the ancient sources, the exact location of the conflict remains a little bit hazy. We don't have precise or reliable information, and archaeologically, as of 2024, we've not found anything really conclusive. But there are several possible locations mentioned in the text, including Tel Gomel, a mound south of Wardak. We also have Karamlesh, Karakosh, and Tel Aswad. Either way, they're all pretty close to modern-day Mosul. After archaeologist Sir Aurel Stein proposed the name Karamlesh in 1938, it became widely accepted as the most likely site. That being said, that doesn't mean that it's always correct. These locations are all situated in the Nineveh plains of modern-day Iraq, to the east and west of Mosul and Erbil, and to the north and south of Jebel Maklub, or Mount Al-Faf, and Mount Maklub. Although Arrian's estimates of Alexander's army's strength are widely accepted by modern scholars, the ancient sources once again provide varying accounts for the size of Darius's army. Contemporary writers agree only on the fact that exaggerating figures mentioned in the ancient sources is pretty common, and they're not really reliable. In fact, the figures presented by Diodorus, Plutarch, and Curtius are excessively inflated to illustrate overwhelming numerical disadvantage of Alexander's army. Now, why would they do such a thing? Well, it's mainly to make him look a lot braver. Of course, if you're outnumbered 2 to 1, yes, that's very impressive. But 20 to 1, that makes for a better story. Well, there was one Reinhold Bickler in his case study who utilized 20 sources published from 1920 all the way to 2014 to illustrate the varying assessments made by authors regarding the strength of Darius's forces. Some authors argue that the Persians simply had a larger number of soldiers compared to Alexander's army. But on the other hand, Hans Delbruck claims, not complains, do apologize to Mr. Delbruck, claims that the Persian cavalry numbered around 12,000, citing issues with their management. The Persian infantry had a smaller number of soldiers compared to the Greek heavy infantry, although the Greek mercenaries numbered around 8,000. Added to that, differing estimates suggest that the total size of the Persian army was approximately 91,000 according to Worry, reporting in 1998, and even up to 120,000 according to other historians. Now, according to multiple sources, Darius's military force had 40,000 cavalry and, get this, 1 million infantry. Wow. Now that's pretty impressive, isn't it? Arrian states that the number of soldiers was 40,000. Diodorus Siculus claims it was 200,000, and Plutarch estimates it to be 1 million, though interestingly enough, in Plutarch's work, there isn't really a breakdown of the forces. He just smacks you with that number. It's not really believable. Well, Curtius Rufus reports 45,000 cavalry and 200,000 infantry, which is equally as far-fetched. Well, prove him wrong, I suppose. Additionally, Diodorus, Curtius, and Arrian all have the same agreement, that Darius had 200 chariots, although Arrian only mentions 15 war elephants. Darius's infantry consisted of around 2,000 mercenaries, too. Greek hoplites at that. So there's something. Well, furthermore, Arrian alleged that the Indian forces were deployed as well. Darius III enlisted the assistance of the Indians living near the Bactrians, as well as the Bactrians and Sogdianians themselves, all led by Bessus, who was the satrap of Bactria. It is probable that these Indians were originally from the Gandhara region. Arrian mentions that there were Indian hill men, as he calls them in the text, who served under satrap Barcentes, who were also part of the Arakotians. These individuals belonged to either the Satagedian or the Hindush ethnic groups. Well, either way, no matter how many there was, we do know that Darius had the larger numbers on his side, but the majority of his troops were of worse quality compared to Alexander's. You see, the sarissa, a 6-meter pike, was one of the weapons used by Alexander's pechatarioi. Now, the pechatarioi and hoplites in Alexander's army possessed superior training, and were outfitted with superior gear compared to the regular Persian soldiers. Darius lacked any capable foot soldiers, except from his personal bodyguard, the 10,000 immortals, and his 2,000 Greek hoplites. Now, during the battle, the Greek mercenaries organized in a phalanx formation, because nothing beats the phalanx, engaged in combat with the immortals, who wielded 2-meter-long spears instead of bulky shields. The Armenians, who presumably also fought in a phalanx configuration, and were well equipped in the Greek fashion, possessed the most formidable weaponry among the Persian troops. Alexander commanded the Hellenic League, the Macedonian realm, Greek mercenaries, and levies from the dependent people of Paeonia and Thrace. According to Arrian, his armies consisted of 40,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry. Historiographers generally agree that the Macedonian army had 31,000 heavy infantry, including reserve mercenaries and hoplites from other allied Greek states, as well as 9,000 light infantry, mostly peltasts, with a few archers. The Greek mounted army comprised roughly around 7,000 men, perfect for some flanking. Well, upon the arrival of the Persians on the battlefield, hostilities ensued pretty much straight away. To optimize the effectiveness of his scythed chariots, which is as horrifying as it sounds, Darius cleared the battlefield of vegetation and recruited elite cavalry from his eastern satrapies and related Scythian tribes. Ever wondered why he was doing all that ground flattening? Well, it was to make sure he could wheel the chariots around and cut everybody in half with those terrible scythes on the side of them. Ugh, imagine the screaming. Well, additionally, there were 15 Indian elephants available to him, which were to be harnessed to Indian chariots. However, it seems that these elephants were removed from the battlefield, as they were not mentioned during the combat, and were subsequently seized in the Persian camp. There's a few possible causes, but it was probably fatigue. And here's the thing. Elephants in battle have a tendency of, well, they can go a little bit into a mode of panic. There's been many times where elephants have been used, and they've simply turned straight around and charged into the forces that were trying to use them against the other. Not the ideal situation. Well, Persian emperors, such as Darius, traditionally positioned themselves prominently with their most elite soldiers. Positioned to his right were the Persian horse guards, Greek mercenaries, and Carian cavalry. In the right center, he strategically placed his Persian foot guards, known as apple-bearers or immortals by the Greeks, along with his Indian cavalry and Mardian archers. The cavalry were positioned on both sides. The Bactrians, Dahe, Arcosians, Persians, Susians, Cadusians, and Scythians were positioned on the left wing, under the direction of Bessus. A limited quantity of Bactrians were stationed in front of the chariots. Matthias commanded the cavalry of the Syrian, Median, Mesopotamian, Parthian, Tapurian, Caucasian, Albanian, and Armenian troops on the right wing, among some others. The Cappadocians and Armenians led the assault before the other cavalry divisions, and the Albanian cavalry were instructed to reverse their direction in order to provide help to the Greek left flank. Curtius asserts that each of the archers belonged to the Armadi tribe. The Macedonians were divided into two factions, with Parmenion leading the left side, and Alexander leading the right half. The cavalry of Alexander's companions were involved in the battle too. The Greek and Paeonian light cavalry were in attendance also, and the mercenary cavalry was divided into two groups, the experienced soldiers positioned on the right of the phalanx, and the remaining soldiers positioned in front of the Agrians and Greek archers. Parmenion stood on the left side of the field, among the Thessalians, Greek mercenaries, and Thracian cavalry. Their task was to maintain their position there, while Alexander executed the decisive attack from the right flank, securing victory. Cretan mercenaries were strategically placed in the center-right position. Accompanying them were mercenaries hailing from Achaia and cavalry under the leadership of Philip of Thessaly. Another group of Greek cavalry, aligned with them, was positioned on their right flank. And thus, the phalanx proceeded forward in a formation consisting of two parallel lines starting from that location. Due to their significant numerical deficit of over 5-1 in the cavalry, and the fact that their line was positioned more than a mile behind, the Greeks were inevitably at the risk of being outflanked by the Persians. In the event of a necessity, the second line was assigned to address the situation, where units were positioned on the sides of the main force. The majority of the personnel in this second regiment were mercenaries. Commencing with the phalanx configuration, Alexander commanded his foot soldiers to progress towards the central point of the adversary's structure. The Macedonians strategically positioned themselves by advancing their wings out at a 45-degree angle, aiming to incite an attack from the Persian cavalry, bait them in. A segment of Darius' equestrian force and standard foot soldiers launched an assault on Parmenion's army from the left flank, while the phalanxes engaged in combat with the Persian infantry. Alexander employed a distinctive strategy in the battle that has been replicated on a few other occasions. Accompanied by his companion cavalry, Alexander advanced to the farthest point of the right flank as the infantry battled the Persian forces in the middle. His plan was to redirect a significant segment of the Persian cavalry towards the flanks, with the aim of disrupting the enemy formation and delivering a devastating strike to Darius at the heart of the battlefield. This required nearly perfect timing and skillful movement, with Alexander assuming the role of leader. As they were about to depart from the well-prepared battleground, he decided to command Darius to initiate an attack. Despite Darius' apprehension about being the first to succumb to a comparable configuration at Issus, and his reluctance to repeat that error, Darius ultimately succumbed and launched an assault due to the overwhelming pressure he experienced. During the initial engagement, the Scythian cavalrymen positioned on the left side of the Persian army attempted to outflank Alexander's far-right position. The subsequent stage was a prolonged and severe clash of cavalry forces between the Persian left and the Macedonian right. The Macedonians, being much outnumbered, consistently experienced intense pressure. Alexander's ultimate attack hinged on the Greeks' capacity to control the Persians, a feat they accomplished by executing disciplined attacks and employing reserves strategically. I'll now read an account of the battle from Arrian. This is directly from the text. Then the Scythian cavalry rode along the line and came into contact with the front men of Alexander's array, but he nevertheless still continued to march towards the right, and almost entirely got beyond the ground, which he had been cleared and leveled by the Persians. And then Darius, fearing that his chariots would become useless if the Macedonians advanced into the uneven ground, ordered the front ranks of his left wing to ride round the right wing of the Macedonians, where Alexander was commanding, to prevent him from marching his wing any further. This being done, Alexander ordered the cavalry of the Grecian mercenaries under the command of Menidas to attack them. but the Scythian cavalry and the Bactrians, who had been drawn up with them, sallied forth against them, and being much more numerous, they put the small body of Greeks to rout. Alexander then ordered Aristo at the head of the Paeonians and the Grecian auxiliaries to attack the Scythians, and the barbarians gave way. But the rest of the Bactrians, drawing near the Paeonians and Grecian auxiliaries, caused their own comrades, who were already in flight, to turn and renew battle, and thus they brought about a general cavalry engagement, in which more of Alexander's men fell, not only being overwhelmed by the multitude of barbarians, but also because the Scythians themselves and their horses were much more completely protected with armor for guarding their bodies. Notwithstanding this, the Macedonians sustained their assaults, and assailing them violently, squadron by squadron, they succeeded in pushing them out of rank. End of the account from Appian. When Arates prodromoi, perhaps serving as the final defensive line in this particular section of the battlefield, launched their assault, the balance of power swung in favor of the Greeks. However, at this juncture, Alexander had already determined the result of the conflict in the center. The Persians, who were circling the flank, were filled with apprehension when Aretes launched a forceful assault against them. During this time, the Persians fled quickly, and the Macedonians went soon after them, cutting them down as they ran away. Darius then launched his chariots at the army led directly by Alexander. However, the companion cavalry and the Agrianians managed to stop several of the chariots by throwing their javelins. The Macedonians, observing that a portion of their chariots had endured the javelin attack, strategically created gaps in their formation to enable the chariots to proceed without being wounded. The remaining survivors were subsequently attacked and slain by the Hypaspists and the grooms of the cavalry. Alexander systematically repositioned his rear guard as the Persians progressively extended their assault towards the sides of the Greek army. He disengaged from his allies and prepared himself for the ultimate attack. They were pursued by the brigade of guards and whatever phalanx battalion he could withdraw from the conflict. Assuming the leadership role, he strategically arranged his units into substantial wedge formation. The Persian soldiers in the center remained in active fight with the phalanxes, hindering their ability to counterattack Alexander's progress. And subsequently, the Persian center was relentlessly assaulted by a colossal formation, resulting in the demise of Darius's elite bodyguards and the Greek hired soldiers. Many individuals in the present era hold the belief that Darius, upon realizing that he was on the verge of being isolated, escaped with the remaining members of his military force. According to Appian's account once again from the text, for a short time there ensued a hand-to-hand fight, but when the Macedonian cavalry, commanded by Alexander himself, pressed on vigorously, thrusting themselves against the Persians and striking their faces with their spears, and when the Macedonian phalanx, in dense array and bristling with long pikes, had also made an attack upon them, all things together appeared full of terror to Darius, who had already long been in a state of fear, so that he was the first to turn and flee. Alexander had the opportunity to pursue Darius in this moment. Conversely, he received urgent messages from Parmenion, which Callisthenes and others would exploit to tarnish Parmenion's reputation later. Amidst a barrage of attacks from several angles, Parmenion's military unit was in a state of chaos, seemingly encircled by the horsemen of the Persian right wing. Alexander was faced with two alternatives. Either he could elect to pursue Darius and eliminate him swiftly, at the potential cost of his own army, or he might choose to go back to the left flank to assist Parmenion and safeguard his troops, so enabling Darius to escape to the neighboring mountains. In the end, he chose to support Parmenion. There was a significant gap that formed between the left and center of the Macedonian phalanx. Simmias's division of the Vegetarioi was under intense pressure and unable to accompany Alexander in his last attack. Darius, leading the Persian and Indian cavalrymen, achieved a breakthrough in the center. However, rather than capturing the phalanx or the rear guard commanded by Parmenion, they chose to engage in simply looting the camp. An attempt was made to rescue Sysigambus, his mother, but she refused to go with them. The rear reserve phalanx successfully repelled the invaders' assaults and dispersed them while they were looting. When Alexander and his allies confronted the Persian right flank cavalry, which included Parthians, Indians, and the most courageous and numerous division of the Persians, their main goal was to break through and escape. Arrian described this event as the most significant clash of the entire fight. As a consequence of the combat, 60 companions perished, while Hephaestion, Coenus, and Menidas sustained wounds. However, Alexander emerged as the winner, and Mazaeus, like Bessus, started to retreat with his army. While Bessus on the left remained cohesive, the Persians, in contrast, rapidly lost their organization, and they were pursued by Thessalian horse soldiers. After the altercation, Alexander and his personal protector chased after Darius, while Parmenion collected the Persian convoy of supplies and equipment. A comparable quantity of wealth was seized, equivalent to the amount captured at Issus, 4,000 talents, together with the war elephants, the king's chariot, and his bow, and a great few trinkets to add to the pile. And thus, with that, Alexander, once again living up to his epithet, the Great, achieved one of the most significant victories, which resulted in a devastating and frankly embarrassing defeat for the Persians. Only a small fraction of Darius's soldiers managed to escape on horseback. Immediately behind them were the Bactrian cavalry, led by Bessus, accompanied by a limited number of surviving members of the royal guard, as well as 2,000 Greek mercenaries. The Persian Empire had previously undergone a division, resulting in the establishment of separate east and west districts that operated autonomously. While making his escape, Darius spoke to the remaining members of his army. Presuming that the Greeks would withdraw to Babylon, his intention was to recommence his journey towards the east and gather a new military force to attack Alexander. At the same time, he corresponded with his satraps in the eastern region, begging them to demonstrate loyalty. However, the satraps had their own plans that somewhat contrasted with Darius's ideas for them. Following the assassination of Darius, Bessus escaped into the east. A comprehensive funeral ritual was conducted for Darius at Persepolis, the former ceremonial capital of the Persian Empire, after Alexander was deeply sorry to witness the death of an adversary with whom he held in high regard, reportedly seeing it as a pretty unfair way to go, poisoned by one of your own people. Well, in the subsequent year, Alexander ardently pursued Bessus, apprehending him, and then carried out his own execution. After that, most of the remaining satraps swore loyalty to Alexander, and were therefore allowed to keep their positions. Upon the death of Darius, it was commonly believed that the Achaemenid Persian Empire had reached its end. Well, thank you very much for listening. Allow me to thank my top-tier patrons. It's Britt, Charles, Stark Factory, JC, Jeffrey, Wendy, Tim, James, Aaron, Scott, Dark, Ben, and Melissa. Thank you very much, and I will see you in the next video. Good night, everyone. Lots of love to you all, as usual.